Preview.
My name is Staton Friedman. I was trained as a nuclear physicist, spent 14 years in industry for little companies like General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, working on a variety of far-out advanced nuclear and space system development programs. It was great while it lasted, but these were 3 years here, 3 years there, 3 years someplace else. I read a book in 1958, Captain Edward Ruppelt's book, about flying saucers. He had been head of Project Blue Book for the Air Force in the early 50s. And the book intrigued me. And I shared it with a neighbor who was 10 years older than I and a good engineer, and he was more impressed than I was, and that impressed me. So I got hooked. It was intriguing. And because I was working on far out things, nuclear rockets, fission rockets, nuclear airplanes, fusion rockets, whatever, the technology aspect particularly seemed intriguing to me because I was working on far out stuff myself. So saucers must be far out too. And the epiphany, a special moment came in the early 1960s when I was at the University of California, Berkeley Library. I had read 10 books about UFOs. And suddenly I was confronted with the largest study ever done for the Air Force, which hadn't been mentioned in any of these books. It was Project Blue Book, Special Report number 14. And I was in data heaven. Charts, tables, graphs, maps, wow. And also, another aspect of this report was that it included the press release that the Air Force issued in 1955 when the study was completed. And I was shocked because there was the Secretary of the Air Force, Donald Quarles, lying through his teeth about the results of the study. I don't like being lied to, especially by somebody at that level. He said, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. Well, I had the report. It was a total lie. The unknowns were 21.5%. That's a long way from 3%. And they were completely separate from the 9.3% listed as insufficient information. So it was wrong on both counts. And they had quality evaluation. It turns out the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable, which is what you'd expect if there was something real. And so I became determined to get to the bottom of this. I don't like being lied to. I mean, I worked under security for 14 years, and you sometimes tiptoe around the truth, but not without blatant lying like that. So I joined APRO and NICAP, the big UFO groups, and joined a group of people when I was working for Westinghouse on nuclear rockets. We had a little UFO research institute and stuff. And I gave my first lecture, it was just happened kind of thing. I had read Frank Edwards' book. He had a best-selling book about flying saucers. He was a newsman in Indianapolis, and I'd been living there working for General Motors. And I got a copy of his book, and then I moved to Pittsburgh to work for Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab on nuclear rocket engines. That was exciting. And I called Frank and said, Frank, I want to go public. Give me some names. He knew everybody. He was a journalist who traveled a great deal. And he gave me some names, and one of them was a producer of a radio show at KDKA Pittsburgh, biggest station in Pittsburgh. And one of the persons was the producer of a radio show called Contact, appropriate program. And I called and offered my services, gave him my professional background, and the response was, don't call us, we'll call you. Less than a month later, they called me at 6:30 could I do their 7 o'clock show, please? Somebody had canceled at the last minute, and I lived near the station. So I said yes, and I did it. And somebody at work at Westinghouse said, Stan, we're reading Frank's book at my book review club. How about giving us a lecture in my living room? That was my first lecture in her living room. And I did the show several times, did more lecturing. And one day, driving to work with a woman who worked at Westinghouse, supervisor, Joanne had a PhD, and we lived downtown, and Westinghouse was out of town, a little town called Large. And I said, gee, I'd like to speak at Caltech, California Institute of not California Institute of Technology, Carnegie Mellon, Carnegie Mellon, major university. And she says, have you talked to the dean? And I said, no, I talked to Dr. So-and-so. Well, Stan, why don't you talk to the dean? He's my husband. He's heard you on the radio. Give him a call. So I gave him a call. And we booked a talk, but it was a daytime talk, so I'd have to take some time off work. His last question was, how much do you want? Well, how about $100, thinking he'd knock me down to 50. He bought the 100, and then he told me what he was paying the other speakers in the series. 1,500, 1,700. Well, the talk went extremely well, and he sent a nice letter to the agent through whom he had booked the other speakers. And they booked me at the Engineering Society of Detroit for $300 in expenses. Wow, I was in the big time. They were sold out for 2 weeks in advance for 1,008 people for dinner and a talk, and there weren't any negative questions. That impressed me. Not the money, but just the fact that Engineering Society of Detroit is a very legitimate organization. And I worked a lot with engineers and scientists in the work that I was doing at Westinghouse and had been doing before that. The fact that they responded so well impressed me. So I gave a bunch more talks, and we had a great success on the nuclear rocket program at Westinghouse. And they canceled the program. Success breeds cancellation, I guess. And I had to find a job. I had a wife and kids and so forth. And so driving across the country, I had located a job at McDonnell Douglas. And my job was the epitome of what I wanted to do, try to figure out how flying saucers worked. That's a technological challenge, you know. How could they go back and forth, up and down, all this sort of stuff. As I'm driving across the country, I hear on the radio that the program that was going to sponsor me was canceled. How'd you like to walk in for taking your new job when they say, you know, we just laid off 5,000 people? Well, that happened. They kept me for 3 months, but I knew I had to take responsibility for myself. Well, since that time, I've given over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 provinces, and 19 other countries. It turns out I enjoy giving lectures. I'm at home on the stage. And I used to have a very good memory. That's very important when you get asked questions, when you need an answer now, not tomorrow, now, you know. So here I am, still going strong at my ripe old age. And I bring to the subject a couple of special characteristics. One of them is having worked under security. A lot of people don't understand security. For example, I've done a whole book about Operation Majestic 12, a very controversial organization, which supposedly, if you believe the important stuff, was set up by President Truman to dig into the UFO question. And I'm one of the few people who's saying, yeah, there's 3 genuine documents, there's 36 false ones, I don't care about them. You know, give me the genuine ones. So my familiarity with security, I mean, I have people tell me, oh, the people on that would have told their wives. You never tell your wife anything classified. First of all, it's against the law. You've signed a piece of paper. And second, loose lips sink ships. You know, who knows who's out there, who's nosing around to find out things that you don't want them to know. So security is one thing. Second is the advanced propulsion stuff. I mean, the biggest objection raised by scientific people, supposedly, is you can't get here from there. The SETI community, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I say it stands for Silly Effort to Investigate, SETI. And they say, well, the nearest civilization would have to be hundreds of light years away. And, well, that simply isn't true. And today, more than ever, we know, thanks to the Kepler satellite, that, gee, there are planets all over the place out there. Not just occasionally. The average, it is assumed today, is 1 to 1.6 planets per star. Now, what does that mean? In a local neighborhood, within 100 light years, which is just down the street, the galaxy is 100,000 light years across, so 100 light years next door, there are 10,000 stars. So if there's between 1 and 1.6 planets per star, that means between 10,000 and 16,000 planets within a mere 100 light years. And throughout the galaxy, we're talking billions and billions of planets. And I'm not saying they all have life. They don't have to. You know, we nuclear guys are accustomed to dealing with the smaller part of something that makes a big difference. Uranium is mostly uranium-238. We want uranium-235. 0.7%. Ah, nothing. During World War II, to build the first atomic bomb, we established a facility that was a mile long, and you pump gas through it, uranium gas, uranium hexafluoride gas, and you want to enrich it in uranium-235. It moves a little faster than uranium-238 because it's a little lighter. During the war, we were using 5% of all the electricity produced in the United States just to pump the gas in that facility, in secret, mind you. So it's the 235 that matters, less than 0.7%. But who cares about the other 99.3%? It's 235 you want. So I have a peculiarly jaundiced background. You look for what's important, not the general things. Third, I found out that I was at home on the stage. I could keep my cool under fire. And I found that I enjoyed doing that. And I had a very good memory. This is a long time ago when I got started. But so it made a good combination. I could answer questions now. And I once figured I'd answered 70,000 questions in the course of my life. And also, I've been forced to think about a lot of questions, what I call the why questions. Why would aliens come here? Why doesn't the government tell us what it knows? Questions like that, I know I'm going to get asked about that sort of stuff, so I've got to ponder it. I've been to 20 document archives, some of them many times, presidential library, stuff like that. And getting back to this Majestic 12 business, the debunkers, a typical example was, oh, this document that you think is genuine was typed in the large pica type. But the National Security Council used only elite type, this gentleman said. And I've got 9 documents to prove it, and they're all elite type. He challenged me to provide any other genuine documents done in the same size and style type as this question document. He had never been, I found out, to the Eisenhower Library. I've spent weeks there. And to make a long story short, I, in my next visit there, picked up 14 documents done in the same size and style type, made copies, and sent him an invoice for $1,000. He offered me $100 each for every genuine document, up to a maximum of 10. He had never been to the Eisenhower Library, so this is off the top of his head. And I copied the 14, sent him an invoice for $1,000, and he paid me. And he got very angry when I published a copy of his check in a book. But it's a ridiculous thing that he said without any knowledge behind it. So I enjoy being at archives. My basic rule is have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear, or pen. I've authored or co-authored 6 books. And I think that's an absolute requirement. You can't just say things. You have to have evidence for them. And sometimes you don't have enough evidence, so you don't say it. You may think it's true, and it may be true, but if you don't have the evidence, no way, Jose, that's not what you talk about. So I also have the benefit of people telling me a lot of stuff after my lectures. They are impressed with my background as a nuclear physicist, worked for big companies and so forth. And so I've had a lot of people tell me things, which gives me food for thought, which lets me know what people wonder about, what some people know that would be useful for me to know, things like that. So it's been quite a trip. First lecture in 1967. Here I am, more than 700 lectures later. All 50 states, 10 provinces, and 19 other countries. That's a pretty good sampling of the world, in other words. From Australia to Finland to Argentina to Korea, China. So I've been really blessed by the opportunity to interact with lots of people, media people, as well as plain audience members, and scientific and professional people. So if you had asked me back in the early 60s if I thought I'd wind up being a full-time ufologist, I'd have laughed my head off. What are you talking about? You know, I worked my way through college. I've got to be a professional physicist. Well, I got away from that, and I haven't regretted it, really. So one of the things that's been interesting is trying to look at the planet Earth, our wonderful home, the way aliens would look at it. How do we look to them? And it's not a pretty picture. I mean, let's face it, World War II, we killed 50 million people. Our own kind. These aren't aliens we killed, these are Earthlings. We destroyed 1,700 cities. Even this year, we're spending $1 trillion on things military. We have exploded, this surprises people, 2,000 nuclear weapons. That many? Yes, that many. And, you know, I'm a nuclear guy, but still, I don't like the idea of nuclear weapons and people being threatened. I've got a great-grandson, I've got a grandson. I'm concerned about the people on this planet. And, you know, it's kind of funny. People can't think of reasons for anybody to travel. Well, I can. All four of my grandparents were born in Europe. I grew up in the United States. I was born in the United States. But migration, colonization, they're a big part of what happens on this planet. I mean, Las Vegas, there weren't many people living there 150 years ago, I don't think you'd say. So I found this a fascinating opportunity to find out about something important. For example, I'm the original civilian investigator, the Roswell incident. And it came about because I was lecturing. I'm supposed to do 2 lectures at a television station, or 2 interviews at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, speaking that night at Louisiana State University. And I did the first 2, and the 3rd reporter was nowhere to be found. This is back in 1978. The station manager is talking to me. He's giving me coffee. He's looking at his watch. He knows I have things to do, and so does he. Out of the blue, he says, you know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. Brilliant investigator that I am. I said, what's special about him? Who's he? His next sentence changed my life. He said, he handled wreckage of one of those saucers you're interested in when he was in the military. What? Where'd that come from? There wasn't anybody around. He wasn't making a joke. He was quite serious. What do you know about him? He lives in Houma. I didn't know where Houma, Louisiana was. I was there later to see Jesse. But anyway, everything went well that day because the reporter showed up finally. The next day, I was at the airport early, and I called information. That's what we use before you use computers to get all your numbers. Got a number for Jesse, called him. He told me his story. And that was the beginning. That was 1978. So that's what, 38 years or 39 years ago. I've been on the case ever since. But it was a very important case to me and to the world, I think. Because here we have the President of the United States, Harry Truman, establishing a group for the purpose of dealing with flying saucers. because we'd recovered the wreckage of one near Roswell. And there have been several other wrecks that have been recovered. All this is done in secret. The United States nor any other country is willing to admit that, oh, by the way, aliens are visiting. That's a big story. So I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And it turns out Jesse Marcel had never told the television guy anything important. He had seen the article in the New Orleans Times-Picayune newspaper. And back then, you'd put in a military guy's name and where he was from, his hometown. It was standard practice. And when I asked the television guy, what did Jesse tell you? He asked him about it. I can't talk about it. So he hadn't given away anything. And I found out later there were articles in newspapers from Chicago West about the event. Early July 1947. It was a big story, headlines. And then they said, oh, well, just a radar reflector weather balloon combination, and they got rid of it. One big question about UFOs, of course, is, so what? Who cares? So there are aliens zipping around the planet, landing hither and there, yon, picking up specimens, abduction cases, for example. I've co-authored a book with Kathleen Marden, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. She was Betty Hill's niece. I had met Betty, been at her home, done television programs with her, and Kathy heard about the story the day it happened, when Betty called Kathleen's mother, her sister. And so that was way back in 1961. So she's been in on the story right from the start. And it's an important story because it tells you something about the aliens and about our reaction to them. They picked up a specimen. It was catch and release time, to use a fisherman's term. It's okay to catch the fish, but you got to throw them back. And Betty and Barney were thrown back, kind of thing. But it seems to be that the aliens are here, among other purposes, to pick up specimens and study their physiological structure, so to speak. And that may sound strange to some people. You realize we go out and pick up specimens, animals, for zoos or for other things. What's going on, It strikes me as one of the most important stories of this millennium that the planet's being visited, partly because when you see where we are on the technological scales, the fact that we can build nuclear weapons, enormous nuclear weapons, also means we could build propulsion systems to get us to the stars. And frankly, if I were an alien, I wouldn't want Earthlings out there because we don't have a good history. We're nasty. We're not nice guys here on Earth. And people look at me, what do you mean? I'm a nice guy. Yeah, but the planet is spending its resources for killing people more than it is for helping them, saving them, feeding the starving, feeding the poor. So there's a question. What are the others in the neighborhood doing? Are there rules of engagement? In other words, are there rules that you can't go bother somebody else? We don't have a planetary government. You stop to think about that, that is a little strange. We have, 195 countries, I think, the last time I checked. And there are people in power who love having power, running each country kind of thing. I get people saying, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? Well, it's a no-fly zone for one thing. That's apparently not why they're here. They know we know they're here. After you've been tracked on radar umpteen times, I've found information about a lot of good radar cases. So my role is to take advantage of my professional background as a nuclear physicist who's worked for respectable companies like GE, GM, Westinghouse, etc., to educate people about the enormous amount of evidence that's out there and to raise the question, how do we want to behave? That's not a trivial question. when we're building nuclear weapons all over the place. I'm a nuclear guy. I appreciate that in the sense of, my God, so much power in the hands of people who I wouldn't trust with that much power. There's a few countries now, everybody else is trying to get nuclear weapons to exert their power on their neighbors. This is a mess. I don't want my great-grandson to grow up in a world that is still doing the same thing when he's an adult. We need to get our act together on this one. So that's one of the things that drives me. Yes, I enjoy being on the stage and so forth, but there's a bigger story here. And I wish I had access to the files of the aliens. How many civilizations make it once they've reached this point of developing nuclear weapons? Will everybody do that? Well, there's a key factor here. Every advancing civilization will want to know, how does its star produce its energy? An awful lot of energy there. And even though we on the planet were thinking that stars produce their energy by burning gas, this is back in the 1920s, less than 100 years ago. Now we know it's nuclear fusion. And the same fusion that can be used for bombs, H-bombs, can be used for a propulsion system. I worked on a study of fusion propulsion for deep space travel in 1962. And the conclusion was, if you want to spend the money, you can do it. It takes a lot of money. These programs aren't 4 professors and 8 grad students. We're talking about thousands of people work on these programs. But we have choices to make. What kind of world do we want in 50 years, let's say? Still scrabbling with each other? More countries trying to build nuclear weapons? The only use for a nuclear weapon is to kill. Nuclear propulsion is another story. And, you know, the Navy learned this a long time ago. The United States Navy has not only submarines that can go around the world underwater, nuclear-powered submarines. In the First World War, or Second World War even, German submarines could stay underwater for a day. Diesel engines, they need air. You can't keep them under the water. Now, you go around the world, literally, underwater, without coming to the surface. That's since 1960. It makes a big difference. It means you don't know where my submarines are. You attack me, I can attack you without your being able to stop it. The nuclear Navy has nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Operate for 18 years. 18 years without refueling. That's rather incredible. If you're a ship captain, that makes one heck of a lot of difference if you don't need to have a tanker or 2 or 3 or 4 circling around. So it forces one to think about these things. What can we do to make the world a better place for our great-grandchildren? I think of that because I have a great-grandson. And I'm concerned. What are the chances of getting through this time of great tension? Right now, as we speak, there are Cold War battles going on, so to speak, battles of words. But those could easily lead to battles of weapons. And that concerns me. So we need to consider our place in the scheme of things. Flying saucers give us so much evidence from all over the planet. I said I've spoken in 19 countries. Everywhere people are interested. And sightings occur everywhere. It's not an occasional this country, that country. It's everywhere. When I check my audiences at the end of my lectures like Flying Saucers Are Real, or A New View of the Cosmos, or the Roswell Incident, and stuff like that. At the end of the lecture, I ask, how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer? I've defined my terms earlier. Just raise your hand and I'll point and count. No names. Typically, it's 10%. I've had crowds as big as 2,000, so that's a lot of people. But then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. If there's anybody left, I'll say, how many of you were in the military at the time? If there's still somebody left, want to tell us about it? Get some interesting answers. One guy says, they took my pictures. Tell me more. I'm sure the audience would like to hear the rest of the story, I said. So he remained seated, gave him a microphone. He was flying, he was piloting a 4-engine Air Force plane across the Pacific. And there was a radio message from the plane 20 miles ahead of them that there was a saucer heading their way. They had gun cameras on the plane, so they took pictures. They called the base to which they were going, and when they landed, the film was taken. They don't go to the drugstore with the pictures. And they were debriefed and told never to say anything. I had another guy say, I'll talk to you later. He was in Vietnam, flying a helicopter in the late 60s. And suddenly this sleek saucer-shaped vehicle comes upon them, circles around them twice, and he figured they were going to be dead in a minute, a new Russian vehicle. And it circled around them a couple of times and then took off. He reported it because you're supposed to report any new weapon system when you're in a war situation. This is Vietnam, after all. The next day, the base commander came to him and said, Lieutenant Jones, you didn't see anything strange yesterday, did you? Yes, sir, I reported it. You didn't hear me, Lieutenant Jones. You didn't see anything strange yesterday, did you? No, sir. I mean, you get enough stories like this and you get a picture of what's going on. The clamp is down pretty tight, especially for military guys. But the difference that makes is that it's the military, the government, that owns the sophisticated equipment, the radar systems, ground-based, the radar systems, airborne-based, space-based. So they have the control of that data. That doesn't go in the newspaper. It's classified information. So I'm very concerned, would love to see the files. What percentage of societies that reach this point, the potential for going to the stars, get through that time, because it's also the potential for developing big weapons. Fusion is fusion, whether you're using it for a weapon or for a propulsion system. So we need, there have only been a little bit more than a dozen PhD theses done about UFOs. There's room for plenty more. And I don't want everything out on the table because there are real security implications of technical data that anybody could use to build better weapons, propulsion systems, etc. But I think we need to start looking at ourselves in a new way. We're not alone. We are not behaving very well from an outsider's viewpoint. I wish I had the gift to see us as others see us, somebody once said. So I have felt privileged to be in the center of this maelstrom of discussions, of activities all around the world. I don't get to travel a lot too, but it's exciting, it's stimulating, it's mentally alerting. You've got a responsibility here. If you know something that would help people think of themselves as earthlings, that would be progress. Ufology is in sort of a mixed bag situation. UFOM is quite active. It's the largest of the civilian groups. It's got a few thousand members now. It receives between 500 and 1,000 reports a month. But it doesn't have funding for a lot of scientific investigations. I heard today discussions about electromagnetic effects associated with UFOs and electric fields and what's going on here, high tech. Secondly, I think it's time for the media to do their job. There isn't a lot of good media coverage of the subject where you look carefully at the facts and the data and you go out to find out more information to back up what you started out with. We need to kick that up. More courses. There have been college courses taught about UFOs. and I've even taught at a couple of campuses, lectured at a couple of the campuses where these courses were taught. But we need a wider vision. There are some religious implications here. Some fundamentalists insist that all the sensible beings in the neighborhood are here on planet Earth, that the UFO stuff is the work of the devil, they say. I think there are implications, and there's a whole book, an excellent book by Dr. Barry Downing, The Bible and Flying Saucers, going back through the Old and New Testaments. And there are UFO cases all over the place. That helps explain some of what's gone on. And so there's a lot of work to be done to move forward in a new direction, to gather more evidence, to get people aware of the evidence that we do have. So that's part of what I try to do, is to get people excited about, hey, maybe we can find out some more. And what you find, incidentally, is that some of the best cases are the ones that aren't reported. The former military guys and stuff like that, because they're afraid of running afoul of security and being punished. Penalties for breaking security are stiff. Long imprisonment, high fines, stuff like that. These guys are going to shut up unless there's a special situation in which they're willing to talk. So ufology is not in a great state. On the other hand, it's better than it was. If you look at meetings like this one here, there's some good papers by some good people presenting solid information. The MUFON conferences often have that. And so we're moving in the right direction, but we got a long way to go. I think within the next 10 years or so, there'll be some serious positive developments, partly because our attitude about life in outer space has changed. You're no longer thought of as some kind of a nut if you think there's life out there. It's pretty widespread. And what I hear very often is, surely we're not the only ones. God would not do that. It's kind of the attitude. And that's a good thing. Now, there's an old saying that new ideas come to be accepted, not because their opponents come to believe in them, but because their opponents die and a new generation grows up that's accustomed to them. So I think that's happening with the UFOs. And I'm glad. Well, I'd like to say that we need to spend some time thinking about what does it mean to us, me, my family, my greater family, that we're not alone in the universe. What will it mean for my great-grandson? What can we do to make the world a better place in which our efforts can be spent to improve instead of to kill? This sounds like a stupid question. Well, of course it's more important to improve than it is to kill. We haven't been acting that way. Just look at the budgets for all the countries on this planet. So I'm still an optimist. I mean, I'm going to be 83 in my next birthday, and I'm still hopeful that man will learn to do better, to be concerned about the larger picture of where we fit in the scheme of things, and to get rid of our big ego about we're it. Whatever we do is the only important thing that can be done. I'm sorry, I don't buy that for a minute.